welcome to Inside the Magic Circle. I'm Jason Augustus Newcomb, and today I am speaking with a legend within the magical community. He's been a Goetic magician since 1972. He has published innumerable books on the subject of magic, of which he's been editor and or writer. He is an incredibly intelligent and interesting magician who combines both innovation and a scholarly view towards the past, going all the way back to the Greek magical papyri and beyond. I'm, of course, speaking about Jake Stratton-Kent. Thank you so much for being here, sir.
It's a pleasure to be here, Jason.
So, to begin with, you're in the position where you have written just a huge amount of stuff, everything from sort of, thelemic primers to very in-depth sort of Goetic work. So if someone is just interested in getting started digging through everything that you've done, what is it, where would you suggest people start? Should they start with the Encyclopedia Goetica, or is there other stuff of yours that you think people should dive into first?
Well, yeah, Encyclopedia Goetica, you've got the True Grimoire at the beginning, which is a practical manual before I get going with anything else, but there's Goetic liturgy as well, and there's other manuals and grimoires. I mean, really, getting stuck in and doing the same crazy ritual for so many 40 days in a row, say, it's just something I kind of take for granted people do. Get in, get their fingers burnt, figure out what they're doing, show some commitment, and hope someone's paying attention.
So you recommend people jump in and do a lot of the same ritual over and over again, just to explore where they're going with it?
Yeah, well, yeah, repetition's a powerful technique in any case. But yeah, I mean, it's the way to learn stuff, is to do stuff.
Jake, I know we already talked about this before we started, but is there any way you can turn your mic up just a little tiny bit more, because I'm having a little trouble hearing you?
I don't know. I can turn my speaker system up more. How's that? Is that any different?
Certainly, with you closer to it. How about you just lean in a little closer to the wherever you're recording, so I can get you a little more.
Yeah, I could move the seat forward, I guess. Let's try that.
We can see your beautiful face more clearly. So, one of the things that I really like to find out about people is how they got where they're going. Now, you called yourself in most of your biographical information, you mentioned that you're a Goetic magician from 1972. So, what was it in 1972 that marked off the beginning of your Goetic career?
Well, that was obviously very early in my career. I mean, I got involved in practical magic around age 16. Paul Hewson's Mastering Witchcraft led to a few other books, including Idris Shah's Secret Law of Magic, which has, it's a condensed compendium of grimoires, and the Grimoire Verum was there. Keir Solomon was there. So, yeah, that's how I got kicked off. Yeah.
It seems like the center of your sort of magical world really is that Grimoire Verum. At what point did that become, the book that was going to sort of define your magical practice in a lot of ways?
But it kind of jumped out at me quite early on, but I went off and did other things like the thelemic curriculum and the chaos magic curriculum, and I was already interested in experimental stuff on Paul Hewson's sort of lines. But eventually I came back to the grimoires, and it had to be the Grimoire Verum.
So I want to go back a little bit earlier eventually, but just real quickly, this is one of my first magical books that I ever got. Waite's Book of Ceremonial Magic, and
another edition.
There you go. Yeah, I think I might actually have that version of it somewhere too. But this, I mean, I've literally had this since I was probably about 13 years old, and the Grimoire Verum in here, to me, it didn't jump out at me for some reason. I remember thinking, it seemed creepier than some of the other stuff to me. So do you feel like you were just drawn to it because of that, or what was it that jumped to you about it?
Well, amongst other things, the fact that you're talking almost exclusively to demons. The Christian element is fairly low key compared to other grimoires. And most of the time, you are conjuring demons by bigger demons. But there's all sorts of things about it that appealed to me quite early on, and that could have been intuition or instinct. I certainly didn't recognise everything I've since seen in it and learned about it. Because I've spent rather a lot of time with the Grimoire and Baron.
Yeah.
Probably more than the French sorcerers who
put it together. So when I was reading this book initially, the thing that jumped out to me most honestly was the black pullet, because the imagery is so interesting and fantastical, and the promises of it were so extremely large. What were the sort of like the practical aspects of the Grimoire and Barum that drew you in? Like what were you hoping to create with Magick when you first sort of dove into it?
Well, when I came back to it, as it were, it was more or less as a result, a chain of events. So Ronald Hutton did Triumph of the Moon, which demolished much of the historical theory of modern pagan witchcraft. And so I was left in a bit of a quandary. I was like, well, okay, if that's not where it all came from, where did it come from? And Mr. Hutton's polite enough to observe that there is a continuous element in the Western magical tradition that witchcraft relates to closely, and that's the grimoires. And the Grimoire and Barum was the one that called most to me. And about the same time, I got hold of a pamphlet on Kimbanda, a recent translation at that time from Brazilian. And there was a Kimbanda hierarchy, and in brackets, a Grimoire and Barum hierarchy name next to each one of them. And I was like, well, that's interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
And so the Christian elements and a lot of the other grimoires sort of put you off, but the more sort of purely demonic aspect of the Grimoire and Barum appealed to you. And then also the fact that it was somewhat connected with the sort of South American traditions as well.
All sorts of reasons to have a look at it. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I could understand that for sure. So when that book came out, that was sort of a little bit disheartening on the neo-pagan front. Did that affect your view of Aleister Crowley and the Thelemic movement and stuff as well, or did that still seem to make sense to you?
Well, yeah, that's a very good point. We talk about the historical myth that Ronald Hutton was overturning. It's this prehistoric golden age of the goddess, which directly parallels as an alleged matriarchal period of history, Crowley's Aeon of Isis.
Exactly.
Well, if one didn't happen, the other didn't fucking happen either. Yeah, they're parallel theories, and they're equally debunked. Crowley's aeonology is nonsense, really.
And so have you sort of disavowed your connection with Thelema at this point, or do you still kind of feel it in your heart?
It's complicated.
I feel the same way.
well, modern Thelema is essentially a walking corpse. But on the other hand, I'm a necromancer, so I can still steal it.
You can keep it alive as much as you want. So let's go back, because I mean there's a huge body of published stuff that you were editing and creating that did have to do with Thelema. So 1972, that you were a teenager at that point.
Yeah.
And so at what point did you realize this is going to be kind of the focus of my life? Was it immediate, or was it just sort of, because when I was a teenager, I was definitely interested in magic, but I also was really interested in music and performance and girls and stuff like that. It wasn't until really my 20s that it really gelled together that was where I was headed.
Well, the impressive magical stuff for me early on, did have a large slice of grimoires and Greek, in fact, Egyptian magical papyri, because only the PDM was easily available then in the Leighton papyrus. Those things struck me as solid. And the Thelemic stuff kind of came after I'd already had those feelings for the older material, and after a long period, with more modern occultism, there was that stuff that drew me back. I gave up all connections with magical orders and thought, I'm just going to do what I want, and what seems important right now is this historical question. What if it all goes back to Goetia?
Right. And were you a member of Thelemic organizations like OTO or AA or a Golden Dawn organization ever?
Not the OTO particularly. I did spend a little bit of time with them, but I was involved with, with British Thelemic groups.
Mm-hmm.
More,
the Typhonian OTO or
no.
Other ones? I mean, I'm not. You know, if you don't want to tell me the secret organizations you were part of, I won't press you. But so you were working with groups and people and stuff.
Yeah. For quite a long time. Through the new equinox under Ray Sherwin, he started as a Thelemic organization, a Thelemic publication. He moved closer to chaos magic, so he wanted to get rid of the magazine to a new editor. He offered it to me, but then I talked to him again, and he said, well, I've given it to Jim Lees, who's got an English Kabbalah, and it all seems very interesting. And so I contacted Jim Lees and said, well, do you want another writer? And then ultimately Jim Lees passed the magazine on to me after 5 issues. So that's my magical lineage. And Jim Lees was interesting.
So you were editor of the last 3 issues. Is that what you're saying of that particular equinox?
I did 11 issues.
Okay.
As volume 7. So it's a sort of weird crossovers going on between experimental Thelemic magic and chaos magic. And Jim Lee's group was also a bit witchy, as am I in a lot of ways. So it pressed a lot of my buttons. Also, how practical they were. They were growing their own herbs, making their own paper, forging their own swords, as well as doing experimental magic with astrological timing. And I've not seen any of that around. I always thought it was important, but these people are a step ahead of me at that.
And so did you get into sort of doing that sort of stuff, making paper and forging weapons and making candles and so forth?
Yeah.
Is that currently still how you work, or do you?
More or less when I'm not having a lazy phase. I mean, I do like to keep my feet on the ground and get my hands dirty. Yeah.
Well, I've noticed that there's some people who really like to emphasize that, like that they I only do this really. I make my own candles and I sew my own garments and so forth. But then there are some people who kind of they have the ideal of that, but then they also do get candles at the store if they need them because they want to work rather than and if you don't have your
I found by trial and error that if you've got one pestle and mortar and you're really doing stuff, you're going to end up needing about 4 of them.
Right.
Because you're going to be emptying stuff into parts, grinding stuff up, and then wanting to grind it together. I mean, you just have a lot of pots and a lot of pounders. I mean, I do think I've probably got more pestles and mortars than I have biros. It's a thing.
So when people are when you're doing that editorial work of Thelemic stuff, were you at that time still getting into the Grimoire and Bureau, or was that a later phase past that?
Well, the Grimoire and Bureau never really went away, but but at the same time, when I was doing the Thelemic stuff, I did still continue an interest, obviously, in Abramelin, because that's canonical with Thelem and the Golden Dawn virtually. I'd already had a preview of what wasn't in the Goetic of Solomon quite early on, because I had access to Scott, probably Discovery of Witchcraft, probably 1976, and that his catalogue predates the Goetic of Solomon, and there's different. So I was already aware of a lot of that stuff, and I thought I always kept files as well. So if you find bits and pieces that obviously relate, they end up in the same file. And
so
my pictures always been a bit.
I mean, there's like different forces within the life of a magician. There's like the desire to study the history and the past and so forth, and then there's the desire to like actually be functional within a magical space. Where would you kind of place yourself in that throughout your history? Like early on, were you doing more scholarly stuff, or were you doing more like practical hands-on stuff?
We've done research and hands-on at the same time. Day one. I mean, my first magical manual was Paul Hewson, and while I read it, I was doing it. I was making.
You just went through it, doing all the rituals and exploring it all.
Yeah, and then following the bibliography to lead me other interesting places, because his is a good bibliography, especially for the time. arranged in sections, and like, you want to look into this, you go there. You want to look into that, go there, and so on. It does a very good job. So I was up and running quite quickly because I was committed. You know, I wanted to do stuff. I wanted to learn stuff by doing. You know, if this is mysterious before you've done it, well, try doing it a few times and see what explains it.
See how it works out. You've mentioned chaos magic a few times. How big an influence on you was the sort of chaos magic scene?
I have a sort of love-hate relationship with it in some ways, because possibly because I'm more invested in traditional materials to start with. Also, I thought some of Carol's stuff was iffy from the beginning. Is active and passive gnosis. I'd already seen studies in psychological studies like Dr. Sargent's, where these occur within one period of time. The so-called active and so-called passive are like phases of each other, rather than things to be explored separately. So I have my issues, and the history is he gives the like timeline of magic is a bit laughable. But
yeah,
the experimental attitude is great, and moved on from Pete Carroll, and whatever it's like in America, the British chaos scene is still very, very committed, very experimental, not stereotyped at all. Yeah.
It seems like when I was first getting involved in magic, chaos magic was being viewed sort of as an exciting new movement within magic, and at this point, it seems like it's kind of viewed as a stale, sort of like not as potent as the grimoires attitude, and that is a huge shift from what I grew up with, and I'm wondering how much you've been an influence on that shift, because you have been encouraging for a long time people to explore the grimoire. So do you feel like you've had an impact in sort of like poking holes in the balloon of chaos magic?
Well, in any of the more commercialized faux types, quite possibly. I think a culture is largely a consumerist thing, but I think we should be breaking boundaries, and with experiment and research, that's what being an occultist is about, is actually doing shit.
So so you like the experimental idea, but not necessarily the sort of getting rid of the baby and the bathwater and just sort of starting from square one.
Exactly. I mean, Carol had a beef with astrological timing. Hardly anybody was doing it at the time, and to actually attack the idea of doing it I thought was a bit daft. I mean, it turns out it was a bit of a local quarrel, quite a parochial thing. So, whereas I was like already aware, astrological timing has been huge in the traditions of magic for a long time. Even if it wasn't always there, it's at least something worth looking at.
Does that play a big part in your own work? You are always thinking about astrological timing in what you're doing?
Well, I was always aware that it was a big thing. I've evolved more down and dirty methods. The grimoires more concerned with lunar timing and the days and hours, which are more effective than people think, and maybe don't work the way they think they should be doing. But down and dirty stuff, and repetition, of course. I mean, if you can't get a perfect planetary election, you just keep doing the ritual over and over again until it fucking does work.
So you're throwing a lot of ideas out in rapid succession here. I don't want to get past some of the interesting things you're saying. So you think that electional timing and planetary hours are of equal importance, or one is more important than the other?
Election is way too complicated for me. I'm way more literate than I am numerate, and also for the purposes of sorcery, electional astrology is a bit upper class. If you've got yourself a nice manor house and servants, you can keep all of this stuff going and put all your time into it. But
sure.
And maybe some of the magical results you need aren't that fucking urgent. Right? This is my problem with the idea that the grimoires are aristocratic angel magicians. A lot of the purposes for which you do grimoire magic seem much closer to the gutter to me than they do to
sure. Lust and success and that sort of stuff.
This stuff is urgent. You want it. You haven't got servants to go grind the herbs for you. You can buy me a sword down at the blacksmith's. Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that I noticed about Grimoire and Virum as I've looked at it more carefully over the years is it does seem like it has a lot of sort of professional application as opposed to some of the other ones. There's certainly a sense that you could utilize this with a client, which you don't see even in the Goetia or Key of Solomon. Those seem rather impractical by comparison.
Yeah, they're exotic rather than down and dirty. Yeah. Grimoire and Virum is very streamlined. You understand, if you read it through, you can see, oh, right, I'll need those instruments at that point. I'll need this instrument at that point. Whereas the Grimoire, Key of Solomon and some of the others are just cluttered with instruments, and they never tell you what they're for.
Right. Yeah, a lot of them. Yeah.
They look nice in a glass-fronted cabinet, but what the fuck are they for? Whereas Grimoire and Virum, it's obvious.
Right.
This fits into the process there. This fits into the process here, and you're up and running. So yeah, the streamlined and practicality of it. It was obviously put together by a practitioner before even some of it was considerably older than the text. There was already lots to appeal to me there. This is hands-on stuff, and I was interested in hands-on stuff, like doing the same ritual 40 days in a row just to see what happened with that sort of thing. So, yeah, this looks good. This is practical.
Right. One of the things I like to explore with people that I'm talking to in this is what their beliefs are around the spirits. Like what do you view them as being? I know that Grimoire and Virum's interesting in that it actually has a separate hierarchy for different continents. So what are those beings? What is that to you? I mean, what do those things mean to you? Would you ever work with, say, the hierarchy that has to do with North America? Would that come up for you?
Well, yeah, it works fairly indifferently of geography, although there's times and places that are particularly powerful for some spirits, and I've been in the right place at the right time with one or two of them before, and it's been incredibly potent. But by the same time, I've worked with Astaroth, who supposedly rules America.
Mm-hmm.
It's in fact very powerful in America in my direct experience. But I've done most of my work with her in the British Isles. I don't find those divisions are restrictive, but they do tell you a bit about the nature of the spirit. And as I say, there have been times in America, in times that have been ruled by Astaroth, where I've had peak experiences, possibly of my entire magical life, direct involving Astaroth. Yeah, but equally well, I can work with her in Somerset or Wales. It's not a restriction.
Astaroth must enjoy you talking about them because your volume just went up significantly while you were doing that. But going, I mean, this is a tough question, and some people have been like, I don't even understand what you're asking. But like, what do you see a spirit as being? Are they an entity like an elephant that might be hanging out in a field eating, and you have to go to the field in order to contact them, or is it something that's more spread out? Like what is a spirit to you?
Well, I mean, I don't have belief so much as being aware of ways of thinking about stuff, that might be good as practical guidelines. And I find ritual magic with spirits, assuming that are acting as if they were autonomous beings with thoughts and likes and dislikes and friends and so on. That seems to work better than anything else. But I don't say that I understand the ontology involved, and talking to them about it doesn't get me a lot further. For instance, this Kimbanda thing. I mean, I've asked the Grimoire and Virum spirits about that, and they're like, well, yeah, we like them, but we're not them. We have certain affinities.
Okay.
One of the major differences is the Yeshus are, at least nominally, spirits of the dead, and my guys say that they have never been alive in that sense, and that they actually help put the universe together as elemental spirits, sort of doing the air bits and the earth bits and so on.
So they're constructing the universe, whereas the Kimbanda spirits are more the result of human activity and their existence.
Something like that, yeah. So I mean, they could say that there was an affinity, but they didn't feel like explaining it particularly, you know. Yeah. And they're really more interested in whether I've got plans to do a spell or not. Let's shut up with the theology and do some spells.
Okay, so that you have a very functional relationship with them.
Yeah, I don't get long dissertations about astronomy or whatever from them, and one of them is said to learn herbalism. Be very powerful in herbalism. Will teach you everything about herbalism, and so on. And yeah, I worked with Hermetics. So it has other names in other grimoires. But yeah, I did working with Hermetics. I want to know all about herbalism. The next thing you know, someone came up to me and said, "Jake, would you like a book of herbals?"
That's a pretty direct correlation at that point. Hard to ignore. So when you are interacting with spirits, what is that experience like for you? Some people see them more visually, some people just hear things, some people just feel things. What is your interaction with the spirit world like?
I do get visual stuff with full ceremonial quite often, and I've had it out of full ceremonial, but I don't trust myself to be there on the day as a seer. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Depends on the spirit, depends on me. So I've had very powerful experiences, full visual manifestation of the spirit. But on other occasions, I've done rather well working with a psychic or seer.
So you do work with seers or scryers a lot?
Yeah, have done and would consider doing so again. Yeah, and you find some important rituals. There's a form to be done solo, and there's a form to be done with a seer.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, well, these are the same rituals. They've just got two parts in this one and one part in that one. And that's what that's about.
And so when you're having a vision of a spirit, is it usually something that's happening in the room that you're in, or more within your consciousness? How does that, come out to get to you?
Oh, well, by these guys, they're usually coming into the room. Yeah.
So you're having a conversation with an entity that's right in front of you, that's right there. Yeah. And I've only asked this of a few people, but I find it an interesting question. Different people answer different ways. Do you find that when the spirits are visual with you, that they are the same size as you, or that they are larger than you, or that they're smaller than you?
Yeah, I do prefer to work outdoors if I can.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get a godlike Thoth is as big as the horizon, and sometimes in inner visionary states you can have an experience of a god that's much larger than you. But
mm-hmm.
When they've got to come into the room with you, there's certain sort of objective things, but yeah, sometimes the ceiling doesn't quite fit. Who can tell? How much of it is visionary and how much of it is them manifesting? I don't claim to have the final answers on ontology.
Oh no, I'm not looking for the final answers. What I'm looking to explore is what different people are feeling in their own practical work, and just the sense that you're getting from stuff. So I mean, everything that you said is very interesting. So
very possible. Yes, it's very possible to relate to them as totally autonomous beings, and they've expressed their sense of humor with me on occasion. Like, oh, you want to know about herbalism? Here's a whole box of books on the subject.
Right.
Just arriving mysteriously and coincidentally. You're going to have to put in some work yourself.
They're not just going to download it all into your head or just explain it to you ad nauseum. So when you're working with the spirits and in communication with them, what is the sort of the medium through which you hear things? Do you feel like it's coming, through your inner mind, or do you feel it almost as if it's speaking to you?
It varies, and some spirits are really good with particular divination tools, and then you find another spirit further down the road who's a complete klutz with the tool you've got used to. So, I've kind of learned to have 2 or 3 different options in situations like that. I want to talk to a spirit I've not spoken to before. Well, yeah. Such pendulums might work, visionary or auditory input might happen, but maybe I need some other things like dice and cards and things available as well. Yeah.
How many times do you try different things before you say maybe this spirit isn't the one that's going to work with me very well? Like how often do you kind of go back to the pool?
Well, not a lot, because I have the, after branching out into lots of things, I've refined down onto the grimoire environment. I find it pretty reliable, and I've worked with most, if not all, of the spirits explicitly and implicitly involved. So I don't have many disappointments, but local dead and local elementals who parent spirits can put you in touch with, and frequently do. That can be different. When I was down in Somerset, I became aware that there was a community of Roman dead there that had been mistaken or misrepresented as Christians, and were in fact pagans, and were a bit pissed off about where they'd been reinterred, because their bones had just been put in the local graveyard of one of the churches, and they most certainly weren't Christians. And there's a little bit of an archaeological scandal involved that somehow I managed to be aware of before the news even broke, because the spirits wanted me to know. And I was like, okay, you dead Romans, how are we going to do this? Are you any good at pendulum? And this guy was like, yeah, I'm great at pendulum. I'm fucking amazing with pendulum. And he completely wasn't. I had to go back to just talking to him directly. It was like there was one dead Roman who could talk for all the other dead Romans, and they were having a bit of difficulty because I don't actually speak Latin.
Sure.
But not worked out. If you do something like an Orphic ritual in our corner of the cemetery, we'd be happy, and we'd do some stuff for you while you still live here. And they did. They did. They were reliable local spirits while I still lived in Somerset. But as soon as I upped sticks and moved to Wales, it was like, you don't have access to those guys anymore.
Interesting. And so do you feel like the work that you were doing with them was helping them to be less unsettled, as well as doing things for you? Or
I'm doing them a favor, and they're going to do a favor in return. But once I was no longer local, that kind of that pact, so to speak, that tacit pact, no longer held. But we've both done our bit for each other.
And do you feel like they're still unsettled, waiting there for the next magician to come along, or are they?
I think they're fine. Their corner of the cemetery is no longer Christian. It's pagan. It had Orphic rites performed over it in the Dead of Night.
You said you like to work outdoors a lot in your rituals. Where do you tend to go for that sort of stuff?
Well, I mean, like I say, I'm fairly good at being discreet, so I work in cemeteries, but without sort of outraging anybody.
Mm-hmm. You don't lay out a full circle and burn incense and light candles and stuff?
Well, I figure out who wants to talk to me in the cemetery, and who I need to talk to at the time. And
in doing that sort of necromantic work, are you utilizing parts of the Grimoire Imperium for your sort of ritual activity, or is there a different way of approaching it?
Well, yeah, this takes us back to Astaroth. One of her two deputies is Neberos, who is the best and top necromancer that the hierarchy has to offer, like the Grand Necromancer of Hell, or whatever you want to say. So, yeah, he gives a lot of necromantic knowledge. And one or two of the others, in and out of the Grimoire Imperium. Necromancy is like a subcurrent in Solomonic magic.
Uh-huh.
It's like not mentioned in most of the chapters, but when it talks climbing and phase of the moon, there's times that are good for necromancy.
Right. Yeah. It's mentioned sort of offhandedly. So I would be remiss in not pestering you about this, but I don't know if you want to talk about it or not. But like from a practical perspective, you've made this relationship with the spirit that's underneath Astaroth, and what are you doing when you go into that cemetery? Are you carrying a talisman and just opening yourself up to the experience? Is there some ritual that you're doing subtly in there to connect with them? How does that work from a practical perspective?
Well, you're talking about lots of visits to cemeteries, and they're not always for the same purpose or to the same grave. There's getting acquainted, stuff going on. But there was a graveyard I used to visit where there were several spirits that lived there that were useful and engaged. There was a local grandmother, for instance, who seems to have been a very powerful matriarch, and she was a powerful force in that cemetery, and was useful to me in you know, in some protective, slightly aggressive protective work, you know, on behalf of, you know, various people. But you know, that wasn't always what I did in that cemetery. You know, and there were different ways into the cemetery and, you know, and different places to visit. You know.
But I'm just curious, like, you know, when you're actually there in the cemetery, have you done a ritual previous to that somewhere else, and you're going in and you're sort of you're opening up? What's that?
Yes, I have necromantic advisors in my spirit team.
Okay, so you're going in, but you're not actually, you know, there with ritual regalia. You're more just sort of, okay, guys, this is we're here on the ground, and now we're gonna open up to this. Oh, I sense something over here.
Not in a big flashy fashion and paint, you know, graffitiing satanic symbols on all over the place.
That would probably create a lot of problems for all of us if you started doing that. When what's that?
I might take a pendulum with me, a stack of pennies as offerings, or other things. Okay. I've been advised as offerings. So I might have some tools, although I tend to dig my graveyard dirt with my hands. So, you know, I wouldn't be taking a trowel or anything necessarily. If there was a plant I might want to steal, but again, I do this discreetly, and and if I was doing stuff in daylight, I'd be a concerned citizen. I might even do a bit of tidying up and putting things in bins.
Sure. But so when you're using a pendulum or just opening up to things, what's the usual sort of change in the atmosphere that happens when you feel like you've kind of made a contact? Is there a feeling in your body that changes, or do you usually see something? How does that work?
Well, you know, I find working with the dead surprisingly easy. It's working with the demons of the grimoires that is more likely to, you know, bring about altered states of consciousness. And so on. You know, the dead is more like, they're kind of used to being human, and so am I. You know, so it's a bit easier, you know, in some ways. And I only use, you know, when it's a magical purpose, then I know which grave I'm going to, and I've got a relationship with that spirits. Yeah, and they're local people, and I live in the same area, and it's kind of, yeah.
So you just know it's happening. There's no real. You just oh, okay, yeah, I get it. This person's right here. And so, what's that?
Business as usual, yeah.
Right. So you've mentioned in your writings a lot that the Greek magical papyri influence a lot of the attitudes and things that you do. Are there actual spell elements from that have crept into your practice as well, or is it? And how do you integrate those with the grimoire and Baron work?
Well, yeah. As I say, there's not many Christian bits in the grimoire environment. I've experimented with alternative elements. You know, if you know what the thing you're replacing is meant to do, and that what you're replacing it with does that thing. I mean, I've worked with PGM components spliced into the format I use for grimoire and Baron. And sometimes I've gone back to the grimoire and Baron version and thought, well, actually, that was okay after all. But, you know, so, you know, I think on my feet, and when situations arise, I figure out what I need to do. And, yeah, PGM and a ritual of Aleister Crowley's that hardly anybody ever talks about because it's a secret AA ritual, you know, Pyramidos. Yeah. It dismantles into parts that you can use or not use and incorporate other bits with. I mean, that's how it was designed. So that's been my framework. I've spliced PGM and Baron bits in there and taken them out again. And
so Pyramidos is basically based on the formula of the neophyte. So it's kind of it's not very Golden Dawn-ish at all, but it kind of it has that a frame quality to it. So that's how you open your rituals a lot of the time.
Yeah, a lot of the time I use the opening and closing. I use the confession because inquisition requires.
Sure. Yeah.
I use the mass because a lot of grimoires require a mass. You know, let this stone be placed on the altar during
right.
Or a mass of Saint Cyprian needs to be done. Well, you know, this has got a mass, and if you had a collect or whatever, you can make it a mass of Saint Cyprian as well.
So you use Crowley's Gnostic Mass stuff for mass stuff? No.
No, I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole.
Why is that?
It's all about heterosexual sex with a man on top, basically, isn't it?
I guess so. Yeah.
I mean, I think heterosexual sex with a woman on top is kind of interesting as well. But and then there's all these other varieties. But the ninth degree is what it celebrates, and I'm really not impressed. No, the master I'm talking about is contained in Pyramidos. It's a master of the 4 elements.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you mean the Eucharistic portion of the.
Yeah.
For those of you who are watching this, who are in my like New Hermetic stuff, my induction ritual of the New Hermetics is very loosely based on this stuff. It removes a lot of the more Egyptian-esque elements of it, but I actually you would recognize, if you read through the Libra Pyramidos, you would recognize some. It does have a confession part, but it's a tarot-based confession part, and it's got the Eucharist of the 4 elements. So there's a connection there between something pretty central to what I do and that. Although, like I said, mine's pretty pared down, a little bit more like chaos magic, in probably the way that people don't like these days. In terms of practical magic, you mentioned obtaining herbal manuals after having talked to a spirit about it. How much does sort of like getting stuff and making stuff happen play a part in your magical practice, as opposed to just sort of communing and learning things?
Yeah, pretty much all the time. There's verbal formula, but there's also stuff that has been made and stuff that has been pounded up, and maybe inks, maybe candles. There's always a hands-on element, and I mean, this goes back to Ian Blicker's. Who's not even Goetic, he's theurgic. There are rituals. You're talking to the gods. You're addressing the gods. You may be even getting to be like a god for a minute, but you're also doing stuff with practical materia.
What I mean is practical results. For instance, like within the Grimoire and Byrne, there's love spells and sort of. How often are you engaging in that sort of aspect of it?
Hardly at all. I don't bother with getting paid in made magic. I find that kind of looks after itself.
So your focus is primarily sort of more enriching yourself from the practice rather than, and I mean that in a subtle, within your consciousness, you're improving your experience of the universe rather than trying to make.
No, I do down and dirty stuff for a community rather than paying clients, usually.
Have you done work for other people with practical magic with the Grimoire and Byrne?
Yeah, lots. I just don't advertise those services. I do them for people I can.
So anyone of the potentially millions of people who are watching this, he's not offering that service to you. Just to be clear.
If you're a local person or part of my family or a friend. I'll sort some stuff out. And have sorted stuff out. And some of it does actually require me to be good with demons.
How often do you work with the demons to do something in the world, as opposed to just working with more of a local spirit?
As usual, it became clear that the appropriate don't traditionally take note of this. It's more to do with springs, lakes, pools, and things. There was a local spirit at a local site that they wanted me to get involved with and sort out, and it'd be good for me and good for them. So it can take up to 6 months to move a big group of pacted spirits and so on. But no, we want you to do this, Jake, so we're going to make it easy for you.
So do you see yourself as sort of like someone who is changing the inner dynamics of the spirit world with a lot of your work? It seems like you're doing a lot of engagement that seems more like sort of like spirit doula kind of activities. You're birthing things and helping people to move to different beings.
There's a fair bit of experimental work, and spirit. The spirits often want me to do stuff for them and do stuff for me in return. And it's almost always on that basis. I mean, there's even a line about in the Grimoire and Byrne about it. These spirits do. do nothing for nothing. Yeah, but I've not found that particularly sinister. Yeah. Although other people might find me sinister, so it's quite relative, isn't it?
In your day-to-day sort of spiritual and magical work, do you work within a sort of a physical temple space in your house as well as outside, or do you keep a sort of a temple going?
I wouldn't refer it to it as a temple. I quite like the term spirit room.
A spirit room.
Yeah, and it's their room, and the way it's laid out, and the things that get in and the things that don't get in, and is down to them. And there's often a lock on it. If I've got visitors, particularly.
Is it set up with a circle inside, or is there some other?
Yeah, there's a Gemini Barham's spirit. There's a circle in there, and mostly it's Barham related. What goes on in there, but they're okay with Saint Cyprian and one or two other folk saints who the church may or may not be keen on themselves. When it comes to the Olympians, the only one they've really let me representing there is Artemis or Diana. Not even Apollo gets in there. It's kind of a very nocturnal space.
Huh. Interesting. So the sort of work that you're doing in there, it's an ongoing process that you feel that you're developing in there. It's not, because I mean, some people will have a temple space, and even within that, they'll sort of like either draw out a circle for a particular working, or they'll have a cloth that they'll throw out for the circle, but then they'll take it away. But you could sort of you've kind of got an active spirit room that stuff is constantly going on in.
Yeah, and it's all related to the spirits of the Gemini environment. If they don't want it in there, it doesn't get in there. You can go and work with that somewhere else, and outdoors or in another part of the house or whatever. But yeah, the actual spirit room is Barham related.
Do you have multiple sort of altars in there for different beings, or?
Yeah, a few different ones on the main one. Yeah.
One of the things that I've noticed about a lot of people that work in a more traditional sense is that they end up having a lot of sort of altars for offerings for various things, and they feel this sort of almost parental or servant obligation to them to constantly be sort of feeding these spots. Do you have that going in your work, or what's your attitude towards that?
Mine's more minimalistic and conditional, right? My guys, they don't want me going in and making offerings unless I'm also asking them for something.
So you're not just constantly feeding them? No. Yeah, I know I'll have a fairly good idea of what they like being given, but I also know that they expect to be asked for something in return. It's okay, yeah. So it's a bit of a transactional relationship that you've got going on.
Yeah, and they prefer it that way. Yeah. I've had to get this is actually coming from them, not me. It's big transactional.
I mean, that seems to be the way that most magic has been set up through the ages, but it seems like there's a lot of people today who have these sort of devotional altars to various spirits and angels and stuff.
Yeah, things overlap. Neo-paganism and so on overlaps, and different gods and different spirits are getting involved in the collective consciousness. But I've got my own way of doing things, and I found it more appropriate not to be eclectic. So Saint Cyprian managed to get in there somehow because he's involved with the grimoire stuff I'm meant to be playing with.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, because your first book in the Goetic series, the True Grimoire, that is purely focused on the Grimoire Virum pretty much exclusively. There's a few little tangents along the way, but it's it's mostly just that with some developments in there. Then we get into Geosophia, which I really like this these 2 volumes of this. It's fascinating. I especially like it because, of course, you use the story of Jason and the Argonauts, so that's you're bringing my attention to the thing. What made you decide to make this second book sort of like a flow through the voyage of Argos or the Argonautica? Like, what made you do that?
Well, as I say, I started off with what if it all comes from Goetia, which it looked increasingly like it did, and that's how I got to write the whole series.
And what you mean by that is ancient Greek magic, sort of pre Hellenic magic.
Yeah, it's so ancient. How much of it is even Greek? Some of it comes from Phrygia or
sure. But that word is a Greek word, so I'm saying that period that would be before,
the Greek world, not necessarily.
Yes, there you go, perfect. So this is, it's a very sort of organic, not super linear journey through all that through all that goes along thematically with an exploration of the story of Jason and the Argonaut, and it's a really interesting way of approaching the material, and there's so, like, your books seem almost like they are inspiration points rather than being like a how to do this. They're more like, here's some ideas that will like infuse your mind with more ideas for you to go further yourself. And that's a really interesting approach. And it seems like it's an approach that requires a person to be both creative and intelligent to really get the most out of these books. So how do you feel about the fact that a lot of people today are really just looking for sort of like almost a recipe for how to approach this stuff?
It's not my problem.
No, it isn't. But do you feel like that? Like, do you feel like that's a journey worth taking, or do you feel like the journey that you've had is more enriching than you could get from sort of just like, oh, I found the right grimoire and I'm just gonna read it every day?
Yeah. I think the journey was important. I wouldn't have been able to I wouldn't even have the balls to take on the grimoire 100% and say, right, I'm just going to work through this solidly without the thelemic trainings of experience in witchcraft and having read X, Y, and Z. So yeah, the journey is important, and maybe you pick up some baggage you later on rid of, but you probably also pick up some good things. So, and I can't anticipate where someone is when they start or what they're going to find next. So yeah, inspiration points rather than this is how it's done, young boy, or this is how it's done in my day.
I think a lot of the ideas in here are ideas that I don't think people are even aware of. There's a lot of stuff in here that is quite unique to your own journey through this stuff. When I have to admit, I haven't read the third part, the Saint Cyprian part. How does that sort of integrate with the first two sections of it?
It kind of ties them together because he's a very grimoire guy, but at the same time he's a very sort of Roman era guy originally. So it's a convenient way of bringing with late antiquity and how that late pagan stuff bleeds into early church stuff. And that's where the grimoires take off from. But yeah, my Saint Cyprian is far more pagan than Christian. I see the original of Saint Cyprian as being a Christian polemic against theurgists near
Sure.
And they're trying to make out all these philosophers, their intellectual opponents, were just black magicians. So Saint Cyprian represents people like Ian Blickus, some major leaders as a negative stereotype. And it was worth exploring the pagan stuff. And so, actually, I don't need to make a confession and accept Jesus into my heart. Pagan magician is fine, and it does underpin the grimoire, and we can reclaim those processes and approaches as pagans.
Do you think that other grimoires can be sort of put back into a more, because some of them, the Christian elements are so strong that it almost feels like it would be gutting it to take them out. You
have to understand what nuts and bolts are being replaced. You know, yeah, Christian nuts and bolts are being used to replace pagan nuts and bolts.
Mm.
What are the different bits meant to do? And then you know how to replace and what to replace it with. You know, say there are 6 or 7 basic stages to grimoire magical structure. You know, you can find identical elements for the same purpose in the Lagan papyrus and so on.
Sure.
I was doing that in the 1970s. I'm segueing, you know, Lagan papyrus and other stuff into grimoire patterns, which they predate and inspire.
Mm-hmm.
It's not surprising that they are interchangeable once you know what the components are, rather than just what you like. Yeah, what you like doesn't matter. It's what's available and what you can do with it that matters.
There've been a number of books on the hygromantia coming out in the last few years, and that seems to be an interesting bridge between the different worlds. How much has that sort of influenced your exploration?
Yeah, the hygromantia sort of is a morphing process from the Testament to Solomon into later Solomonic.
Yeah.
In different manuscripts, you actually see the morphing going on.
Right. Yeah. There'll be more and less pagan elements in different bits of it. Yeah. Where you'll see sort of like invocations to the planets, and then they won't be there in other versions of it. How, like, I mean, am I missing out on a lot not having read the third part? Like, is it is it sort of like stopping at Empire Strikes Back? I don't know if you watch Star Wars, but stopping in the middle of the story, or is it more just because I mean, it seems like in a way True Grimoire stands on its own. You don't, like that's a solid book, and Geosophia almost stands on its own separately. I mean, they're interesting companion pieces, but they're both, solidly useful without the other. So Saint Cyprian, is it sort of like the clear next step from those two, or is it another sort of self-contained thing that if someone didn't want to read True Grimoire and Geosophia, could they get a lot out of the Saint Cyprian stuff as well?
Yeah, they all work as standalones, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also mutually supportive and developmental from each other. And Saint Cyprian or Testament of Cyprian, like I say, it shows how it takes the grimoires and the ancient period and puts them together. Whereas True Grimoire is late grimoire period. Geosophia predates Testament of Cyprian kind of puts them together and also approaches the models. And it's something I like to do. Here's the 3 main models of the afterlife state and so on. And in Testament of Cyprian, I do the 3 models from chthonic to transcendental and what's in between. There's a god of time. There are 3 completely different ways of understanding what god you're actually meant to be working with when you do ritual.
Sure.
I think, you can strip that bit off and work with this bit, or you could go a bit further and go out to this bit. And if you understand all 3 models are around, you can recognize what other people are playing with, and how old that stuff is. And often it seems that the nuts and bolts from the oldest phase are the bits that stick, and the bits from these 2 later phases, well, they're more or less dispensable and partly theological commentary. Yeah.
Do you work with sort of Uranian or transcendental magic, or do you prefer to just stay in the more sort of underworld realms for your work?
Well, I've worked with fixed stars, the moon, and planets, and I've certainly had a go at astrological timing involving the outer planets. But the idea that they relate to Kepha or some supernal triad or whatever, I find a bit nonsensical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly it doesn't seem like, that doesn't really make any sense, because they're just sort of planets, again, within the same structure that we're trying to transcend if you're going to a transcendental space. So particularly with, Pluto being, that's sort of like a questionable planet to begin with, I suppose. So in your work, do you feel like you've kind of, figured out it for yourself, or is there still exploration going on? Are you still trying to go deep?
there's still exploration going on, and I suspect there always will be. You know, I don't have all of the answers, but I'm quite interested in the questions. Yeah.
What are you interested in right now? Like, what's the thing that's kind of gnawing at you and making you want to go deeper right now?
Well, this relation between celestial and chthonic is quite a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing a lot of research. Well, I have already done a fair bit of research on the lunar mansions and the spirits that relate to them, and how, you know, all the herbs and resins that actually do magic seem to come from this planet. We're not importing any from anywhere else. So yeah, sublunar elemental conception of things. The lunar mansions as a nocturnal map of the heavens that is much more detailed and star related than the zodiac is. That's kind of where I am at the moment.
And are you working on a book related to that, or just your own personal research that you're doing right now?
Well, both. Yeah, both. I'm visiting stuff from a long time ago in my career, and also updating and saying, well, where is it going, and has this planet, has this star moved any since I was 20?
Well, that's an interesting question. So do you think that you're always working on a book? You know, like, is there always that sort of next project in your mind of where you're heading with stuff?
Yeah, I'm always interested in stuff, and I like to be doing stuff. Yeah, and if I'm not doing magical stuff, I'm probably working with ideas about strategy, because I haven't had a proper fight for about 6 years now. But the world of strategy on the tabletop with little toy soldiers will always distract me, and that involves creative stuff and research. So yeah,
sure.
My hobbies get anal, really.
Have you written about other topics besides occultism in your life?
I've tried to, but they always end up on the back burner.
I know what you mean. I've written a novel, and I have started a bunch of other ones, and I just never
think about it, but never quite happens. Yeah.
I mean, for me, there's a certain amount of just the economic concern. When I write a book that's about occultism, I kind of already have a crowd of people who are interested in it. Whereas when I write a book about anything else, there's just no one wants it. So it just ends up being time not spent productively. Although, I mean, very interestingly, to maybe perhaps, but what's that?
Might be good exercise for you, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So, if people want to kind of understand where you're coming from, do you have a website or a blog or anything like that where you do things, or are you just purely just sort of the?
It's just the books, yeah, and nattering away on Facebook, really. I don't want a product line. I don't want paying clients. Yeah.
None of that is interesting to you at all.
I'm not interested in becoming a commercial venture. Yeah.
So should people grab True Grimoire as the first thing that they look at, or?
It's a good one to start with, especially from a practical point of view, and it's supported by Goetic liturgy from Hadean Press, which is even thinner and cheaper. So that's where the practical stuff is. Yeah. And the other stuff is stuff I've looked at. I mean, don't just read the author, read the stuff he reads.